When I refused to give my mom my inheritance, she called a family meeting, but what happened when I walked through that door felt more like a trap than a talk. And when I played Grandpa's final voicemail, the whole room went silent before diving into the story. Comment where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories. The day after I told my mom about the inheritance, she showed up at my apartment. No call, no warning. Just a knock on the door at 9:15 in the morning, holding her oversized handbag and a folder in her hands. I remember opening the door, still in my pajamas, and seeing her standing there with this oddly satisfied smirk on her face. I thought maybe she came to talk, maybe even apologize for how distant she had been after Grandpa passed. But no, she walked past me like she owned the place, sat down on my couch, and started pulling papers from the folder. I made a list, she said, flattening the sheets on the coffee table like a business presentation. Just a few things I thought we could get sorted out now that the money is coming in. Confused, I sat across from her and looked at the papers. It wasn't a budget. It wasn't even a conversation starter. It was a demand list. Page 1. Pay off her mortgage. $187,000 renovate her kitchen. $32,000 clear her credit card debt. $14,500 page 2. Fully fund my younger brother Jason's college tuition. $48,000 buy him a used car. $10,000 set aside $5,000 for his study abroad trip to Spain. Page 3. 2-week luxury vacation to Italy. For stress relief, $5,000 spending money for the family to enjoy a new phone, a new wardrobe, and unbelievably $2,000 for cosmetic. Dentistry, she even wrote the total at the bottom. $317,500. She looked up, proud. This still leaves you with over $150,000, more than enough to get yourself a nice apartment or something. I was speechless, not because of the number, but because of the audacity. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't her asking for help. This was her treating me like an ATM, and I couldn't ignore the way she said, "we," as if my inheritance was now a family pot. I took a deep breath. Mom, I need you to understand something. Grandpa left that money to me for a reason. He wanted me to be okay. He wanted me to have a future. She blinked. So you're saying no? I tried to be gentle. I'm not saying I'll never help. But this isn't the way. I just found out I'm the sole heir. I haven't even figured out how I'm going to manage it yet. I want to invest some of it, go back to school, maybe buy a place. I've been working 2 jobs just to keep up with rent. This money, it's my chance to breathe. Her face twisted. The smirk was gone. Her tone changed instantly. You're being selfish, she snapped. After everything I've done for you. Now let me pause right there because this is the part where people like to say, but she's your mother. Let me ask you something. Where was my mother when I was scraping together quarters to afford groceries? Where was she when I begged her to co-sign a student loan and she told me she didn't want her credit tied to a maybe degree? When I got evicted from my college apartment for missing rent, she didn't even answer the phone. It wasn't that she was struggling. It was that she just didn't want to be involved, but now that there was money, she wanted to play the mother role again? I looked at her, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. I said, you weren't there when I needed you. Grandpa was.
He raised me not just with love, but with presence. I'm going to honor what he wanted.
I'm using this money to build a future, not patch up someone else's past mistakes. Silence, then her jaw clenched. Her eyes turned icy, like I had just betrayed her. She stood up, grabbed her folder, and said the words that still echo in my head today. You'll regret this. Not, I'm disappointed. Not, I understand but I'm hurt. You'll regret this. And then she walked out. No hug. No goodbye. Just the click of the door as she slammed it shut behind her. That day changed everything. Not just because of the argument, but because it was the first time I truly realized how conditional her love was. How money can twist people. How sometimes the people who should have your back are the first to put their hands out, not in support, but in expectation. I didn't regret what I said. Not then. Not now. And even though it would lead to something much bigger, something I never saw coming, I stood my ground because this inheritance wasn't just money. It was a second chance, and I wasn't about to hand it over to someone who only showed up when it was convenient. The family meeting that wasn't about family. 2 days later, I got a text, not a call, not a conversation, just a blunt message in the family group chat that hadn't been active in months. Family meeting at the house. Sunday. Be there. That was it. No. Hi, no. How are you holding up after Grandpa? No context. Just 4 words that read less like an invitation and more like a court summons. I stared at the message for a few minutes. No one else replied. It was just me, Mom, 2 uncles, my aunt, my brother, and a few cousins in that group, all completely silent. I had this sinking feeling in my gut. I knew what it was about. They weren't ready to talk. They were ready to ambush me. Sunday. Arrived, I parked outside the house, my childhood home, and took a long breath before walking up the steps. It felt weird being back. Like the walls still remembered all the yelling, the cold silences, and the slammed doors from when I was a teenager. I knocked once, then opened the door, the scene I walked into. It was straight out of a bad sitcom. Everyone was already there. My mom was sitting dead, center on the couch like a judge waiting to sentence someone. On either side of her were my Uncle Jeff and Aunt Brenda, arms crossed like bodyguards. My brother Jason, who hadn't spoken to me in months unless he needed something, sat by the window scrolling his phone like this was just some boring chore. 3 cousins sat in the corner, whispering and smirking. I was the last to arrive. And every eye turned to me the second I stepped inside. The living room lights were on full blast. The blinds were shut. The energy was heavy. Nobody smiled. I didn't even get a hello. I slowly walked in and sat on the only empty chair, conveniently placed directly across from my mother. The silence dragged for a moment. Then Mom stood up, cleared her throat, and said with absolute seriousness, "We're here to talk sense into you. You're being selfish, and the family won't stand for it." That was her opener. No greeting. No easing into it. Just straight to accusations. Like I was some criminal who'd betrayed the entire bloodline. I glanced around. Everyone stared at me like they already knew their lines. Like this was scripted, planned, rehearsed. Uncle Jeff jumped in right after her. "You think you're better than all of us now because you got some money." Aunt Brenda added, "Your grandfather would have wanted the whole family to benefit, not just you." I hadn't even spoken yet. It was like being thrown into a courtroom where I didn't know the charges until the trial started, and I wasn't allowed to speak in my defense. Then came the insults. Greedy, ungrateful, disrespectful, and the guilt trips. "We changed your diapers. We made sacrifices for this family. Your cousins are struggling too. How can you sit there and keep all that money to yourself?" I sat there, silent. Not because I didn't have things to say, but because nothing I said would matter. This wasn't about fairness. This was about control. About entitlement. They hadn't cared about Grandpa when he was alive. Most of them visited once or twice a year, if that. I was the one who took him to his appointments, cooked for him, listened to his stories, held his hand when he got confused. But none of that mattered now that money was involved. Mom took over again, arms folded. "You know what you're doing is wrong. That inheritance was meant for the family. You don't even have kids. You don't have responsibilities. What do you even need it for?" I wanted to laugh. As if having dreams wasn't a valid reason to protect what someone left me. As if being single meant I didn't deserve a future. She kept going. "We've talked about it, and we think the best thing to do is to put the money into a shared family account. That way it's safe. Everyone gets help. No more secrets, no more drama. We've talked about it." Those words rang in my ears. They had met, without me, about my inheritance. To decide what was fair. Not once had anyone called me to check in. Not when Grandpa died. Not during the funeral. Not when the will was read. But now, suddenly, they were concerned. I looked at my brother Jason. He didn't say a word. Didn't even look up from his phone. He just nodded when Mom spoke, like a puppet being operated from across the room. I looked at my cousins. The same ones who used to tease me for being the grandpa's favorite. And now they were acting like I owed them reparations for getting left something they didn't even expect. And finally, I looked at my mom. Her face was hard, cold, dark. There was no love in her eyes, no sadness. Just expectation. She wasn't asking. She was demanding. I sat back in the chair, exhaled slowly, and said nothing, because I realized right then, this wasn't a family meeting. This was a shakedown, and I wasn't going to fold, one by one. They tried to break me. There I was sitting in my childhood living room, surrounded by people who were supposed to love me. My mom at the center, flanked by relatives who suddenly remembered I existed now that I had money. No one was holding back. No one cared how I felt. They came prepared. They started talking. Uncle Jeff went first. His voice was loud, confident, almost theatrical, like he was performing for an invisible jury. You wouldn't have had that inheritance without this family, he said, wagging his finger like a preacher. Your grandfather built his life with us. We were there during the hard years. We earned that money just as much as you did. I wanted to laugh, or maybe scream. Jeff hadn't visited Grandpa in 2 years.
He called him on Christmas if he
remembered, but now he wanted credit for Grandpa's success. He continued, if you have any respect, you'll do the right thing and divide it. I bit my tongue, then Aunt Brenda chimed in. Her voice was sharper like the edge of a broken plate. You lived rent-free with your mom for years, she said. You cost her thousands in food and bills. Now it's time to give back. What she conveniently forgot to mention was that my mom kicked me out when I was 18 because I missed curfew for the 3rd time. That I had been sleeping on friends' couches and working overnight shifts just to afford food. I hadn't lived rent-free. I had barely lived at all during those years, but Aunt Brenda just kept going, shaking her head like she was disappointed. Then came my cousin, Jake. The money isn't just yours, he said, arms folded across his chest. You're young. You don't even need it. You don't have a mortgage or a family. Why wouldn't you help your mother? This coming from the same guy who once stole my PlayStation and tried to sell it on Facebook Marketplace. The same guy who borrowed $200 from me 2 years ago and never paid it back. These people weren't asking for help. They were demanding a payout. Like I was holding a winning lottery ticket they'd already decided was partially theirs. No one cared what I had been through. No one mentioned the nights I spent caring for Grandpa, the doctor visits, the times I had to clean up after him when he couldn't get out of bed, the hours we spent playing chess and watching old westerns when his memory started to fade. They didn't see any of that. To them, I was just the lucky one. Then everything shifted. Mom stood up. She had been quiet up until now, watching, measuring. She looked right at me with that cold, familiar glare, the one I used to get when I forgot to do the dishes or came home 5 minutes late. She pulled out a manila envelope from her purse and placed it on the coffee table like it was Exhibit A in a courtroom. I've spoken to a lawyer, she said, her voice low but firm. We're contesting the will. The room fell silent. She took a step closer to me. There's no way your grandfather meant to cut out the rest of us.
He wasn't in his right mind. He was manipulated probably by you.
There it was. The final card. The accusation. Not just that I was selfish, but that I had brainwashed a dying man into leaving me everything. I felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath me. Suddenly, I wasn't just the greedy grandchild. I was the villain in a family conspiracy theory. A thief in their eyes. Mom continued, this isn't over. We're filing. If the court agrees the will is invalid, everything gets split equally. You won't be able to hide behind Grandpa's favoritism. She sat back down, crossed her arms, and stared at me with this bitter satisfaction. Like she had delivered the final blow. Like the war was already won, and that's when I realized something. They never wanted to understand. They had never asked me how I felt about Grandpa dying. Never asked me what it was like being the one holding his hand as he took his final breath. Never asked if I was okay. To them, I was just the roadblock to their payday, and that's when I spoke. I sat forward, slow and calm, and met every single one of their eyes. No, I said. You don't get to rewrite history just because you didn't like the ending. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I played the voicemail Grandpa had left me 2 weeks before he passed. I want you to know I've made my final decision. You've been there for me, more than anyone else. You've earned everything, and I want you to live your life free, not stuck like the rest of them. I love you. As the words played, the smugness started to crack on their faces. Even Mom flinched. When the voicemail ended, I looked at her and said, "You want to fight this in court? Go ahead, but I promise you, everything in that will was his decision. You just don't like that he finally saw through all of you." Silence. No one knew what to say. I stood up, heart pounding, voice steady. This meeting is over. And I walked out, not because I was scared, but because I finally understood. Blood doesn't make a family. Loyalty does. The moment I finally spoke up, I stood up. Not suddenly, not angrily. I stood calmly, deliberately. The way someone stands when they know the truth is finally on their side. The room was still. All eyes locked on me. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my voice, when it came, was steady. Firmer than I expected. "I loved Grandpa," I began. "And more importantly, I showed him that love." My eyes moved from face to face, pausing on each one of them, my mother, my uncles, my aunt, my cousins, all of them suddenly so quiet after trying to tear me down. I was there when his memory started to slip. I was there when he got too weak to drive himself, when he needed help getting dressed, when he cried because he couldn't remember what day it was. I was there. I took a step forward and continued. "You all ignored his calls, forgot his birthday, only showed up when there was food on the table or a holiday to celebrate. And even then, half of you were on your phones or talking about yourselves." Aunt Brenda looked down. Cousin Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Do you remember the last time any of you spent a full day with him?" I asked. No one answered. Of course they didn't. Grandpa wasn't stupid, I said. He noticed. He saw who cared and who didn't. He knew the difference between obligation and love. Then, without breaking eye contact, I slowly reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. I didn't come here to argue, but I did come with proof. I scrolled through my voicemails and tapped one. I turned up the volume and held the phone in my hand, letting the room fill with the soft, raspy voice of the man they were all pretending to miss. "I want you to know, I've made my final decision. You've been there for me, more than anyone else. You've earned everything, and I want you to live your life free, not stuck like the rest of them. I love you. Don't let them guilt you. This is my choice." The message ended. Silence. Heavy, awkward, real silence. The kind that fills a room when there's nothing left to say. My uncle leaned back into the couch like the air had been sucked out of his lungs. One of my cousins looked away entirely, pretending to check his watch. And then, of course, Mom broke the silence. Her voice was cold, defensive. "You planned this," she hissed. "You manipulated him when he was old and vulnerable. That voicemail proves nothing. He was confused near the end. You knew that. You took advantage of him." There it was, the final desperate pivot when the truth couldn't be denied. The only move left was to discredit it, but I didn't raise my voice. I didn't react. Instead, I met her gaze and said something I'd held in for far too long. "No, I didn't manipulate him. I loved him. I took care of him when nobody else did." I showed up. I took another deep breath, letting the moment land. "You're not angry because I planned anything. You're angry because, for once, someone in this family was held accountable, and it wasn't me." That's when she looked away. That's when I knew I'd finally said the one thing she couldn't argue with. I turned back to the rest of the room. "You all want to talk about what's fair? You think it's fair that the people who ignored him, belittled him, or used him should get the same as the person who actually cared. That's not fairness. That's entitlement." They were quiet again, not because they agreed, but because they had no more cards to play. No more rehearsed lines. No more fake concern or guilt trips. This wasn't about love. It was about loss of control. I reached for my coat. "This isn't just about money," I said. "This is about respect. And none of you showed him any until he had something to give you." I looked back at Mom one last time. "I won't apologize for doing what was right. Not then, not now. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but nothing came out, and I left, outside. The air felt different. Lighter, colder, free, for the first time in what felt like months. I felt like I could breathe. That meeting wasn't a confrontation. It was a reveal, a spotlight exposing everything I already suspected but had been too afraid to believe. That sometimes even family can become strangers. That sometimes love gets buried under resentment and greed. And that standing alone is still better than standing with people who only want to tear you down. Later that night, I sat on my couch, played that voicemail one more time, and cried, not because I was sad, but because I realized I didn't need anyone's approval anymore. I had already been chosen by the one person who truly mattered. Walking away was the beginning of my peace. I walked out of that house without looking back, not because I wanted to be dramatic, not because I thought I had won something. I walked out because there was nothing left for me inside those four walls. No warmth, no connection, no family, only people who saw me as a bank account. And I had finally chosen myself. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, emotionally drained, but strangely calm. I replayed the family meeting over in my head, every guilt trip, every accusation, every false memory they tried to throw at me. But the thing I kept coming back to was Grandpa's voice. "You were there when no one else was." That one sentence gave me the strength to hold my head high. A few days later, the phone rang. It was the lawyer. My mother had followed through on her threat. She had filed paperwork to contest the will, claimed undue influence. Grandpa wasn't mentally sound. Accused me of manipulating an elderly man for financial gain, but what she didn't realize was that Grandpa had prepared for this.
He knew what kind of storm would follow his decision. The voicemail was powerful.
But there was more. He had written a signed letter, with his lawyer present, explaining exactly why he chose to leave everything to me. In it, he mentioned specific incidents, times when others had ignored his calls, and times I had stayed overnight to help him through difficult days. He explained how he felt safe in my presence, respected and truly loved. When the lawyer told me the case wouldn't even go to court because the evidence was that clear, I felt a kind of relief that's hard to put into words. Not victory. Closure. Months went by. No calls. No birthday texts. No, let's talk about this. Messages from anyone in the family. Silence. And you know what? It was beautiful. For the first time in years, I had peace. Real peace. No drama, no manipulation, no pretending. I used part of the inheritance to finish my college degree. Something I had dreamed of doing but never could afford because no one would co-sign my loans, and I was too busy trying to survive paycheck to paycheck. With that degree, I got a better job. A career, actually. One that let me move out of my tiny one-bedroom and into a small but cozy home of my own. A place where I could finally breathe, decorate, and feel proud when I walked through the door. And then I did something that would have made Grandpa proud. I started a non-profit in his name. It's small but meaningful. We help elderly people reconnect with their families through letter writing programs, community visits, and even recorded memory journals. We call it Voices of the Past, because I know what it feels like to sit with someone who's fading and still try to preserve who they are. The first time I received a thank you letter from a family whose estranged father reconnected with them through our program. I cried hard. I could feel Grandpa with me in that moment. Like he was saying, "See, I knew you'd do something beautiful." Eventually, the silence began to crack. First, it was one of my cousins. A simple message. "Hey, I was wrong. Sorry." Then a few more. Some offered real apologies. Others tried to slide back in casually, as if nothing had happened. Like, "How have you been? And we should catch up soon." I didn't respond to every message. I didn't block them either. I just observed, because I'd learned something powerful. Apologies mean nothing without changed behavior. So I set boundaries. Some cousins I reconnected with slowly, carefully. A few even volunteered with the nonprofit and proved they truly meant it. But others I kept at a distance, including my mother. She never apologized. Not directly. Instead, she sent me a birthday card 6 months later. No message inside, just love mom and a $20 bill like we were still pretending to play nice. I didn't cash. I didn't call her because she didn't just try to take my inheritance. She tried to erase my truth. She tried to weaponize the grief of losing the one person who truly cared for me. And that's not something you bounce back from with a Hallmark card and a crisp 20 now. When people ask if I'm on good terms with my family, I smile and say, I'm on good terms with myself. And that's what matters. Because here's the truth they don't teach you growing up. Family isn't about blood. It's about behavior. It's about who shows up. Who listens, who respects your boundaries, your choices, your pain. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away from the people who share your last name and toward the life you deserve today. I wake up in a home I own. I work a job I love. I run a nonprofit that matters. And most importantly, I live with a sense of peace I never thought I'd have, not because things are perfect, but because I'm free from pretending. And that, to me, is worth more than any inheritance. So let me ask you this. What would you do? If your family turned on you over money, would you give in to keep the peace? Or stand your ground, even if it means walking alone? Comment below. I'll be reading everyone. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to hear it.